Everyone, this is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy. Be sure to check out our blog, our Facebook group, and subscribe to our channel. And our great sponsors, Phil Italy, Italy Rooting, and Abitativa Casa. And my guest today is Anthony Taddeo from the Italian musical group Alabora. So welcome, Anthony. Thank you for being here.
It is an absolute pleasure, Bob. Thank you for having me.
So I don't think you're first or second, third generation Italian. Where do you fall into the scheme of things?
Yeah, my dad is from Italy, actually.
Wow,
Yeah.
fantastic. You're closer than I am. So when
Yeah,
when did your family come?
my dad moved here in 1970. He was about 12 years old, and him, my aunt, and my grandmother moved here because my dad's father, so my nonno, passed away actually at an early age. And so my nonna was left in a place where she had to care for two kids by herself. And she felt like she had cousins and relatives in Cleveland already. And I think she also just felt better about trying to make a life as a single woman trying to raise two children. Maybe she just felt more comfortable with the idea of working in America as opposed to, potentially having to go down the road of basically probably just getting remarried in Italy and trying to find support that way. So, but I'm very thankful for that. And she was an amazingly strong woman. And we actually ended up naming my daughter after her. Her name was Clorinda. So, yeah, someone that meant a lot to me growing up and is part of the reason why I've taken such great pride in my heritage is because of her example, honestly.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So what part of Italy do you come from?
So my dad is from a province of Italy called Latina, which is between Rome and Naples, and it's situated at the bottom of Lazio.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I have a few friends there. So who in the family was already here in Cleveland? Was it close relatives to hers?
Yeah, yeah. She had a couple of sisters that were already here in Cleveland.
Nice, nice. And, I didn't realize there was such a large population throughout Ohio and going back, geez, probably over a century now.
Yeah.
I found out, so many different Italian connections in the United States.
Oh, yeah. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, yeah. So did you grow up? I love asking this question. Did you grow up eating mostly Italian food?
No, not mostly Italian food, but we had the traditional kind of like Sunday lunches, late lunches, dinners together almost every Sunday, and that's kind of a core memory as a child growing up.
Yeah, yeah, that's one of my favorite memories. My mother there were 9 in her family. When my grandmother's birthday, which was in the summer, and Mother's Day and things like that. I mean, there were 100 people in the backyard. I mean, it was just so fantastic. And it was just food all day. I mean, from when you got there until you one left, they were sticking food in your face.
Right, right.
It was such a great experience growing up. And, it's one of the things that I really, really miss. So did, other than the food, were there other Italian traditions that you grew up with?
Not a terrible amount of them, actually. In the last 15 years, my dad has started making wine every year with our cousins, and that's become a staple. And they do everything from scratch, which is very cool. They buy the grapes and they have the press and they go through the whole process together. Other than that, no, there wasn't anything that was like every single year or every single week we do this one thing other than getting together on Sundays.
Yeah. Well, that's a great thing to revive is making the wine. I remember, vaguely my grandfather making wine. I was kind of at the younger end of my parents were both at the younger end of the family. So
Mm.
by the time I was growing up, my grandparents were all late 60s, early 70s, but I do remember my mother's father having the wine barrel in the basement and the press and the
Yeah,
smell of the grapes. I mean, it's a very unique smell.
it is.
It
Absolutely.
is. And I was talking to one of the guys at the club who makes his own wine, and he said he learned from a guy. He didn't need any special equipment. He could go listen to the wine and hear the bubbles and decide when it was time to finish. It's incredible. And he said he would test it with I guess, was it a hygrometer or something like that, whatever that right
Mhm.
term is. And he said he was spot on every time. Really, really quite amazing. So now, I know you have this great group, Alabora, and uh, how'd that start and what made you start?
Yeah, so I mean, as you can tell from the little bit of the story that I've told already, is that Italian culture has always been kind of at the core of my identity and has been something that I've been very proud of growing up because in all of our family get-togethers, everyone was speaking Italian. I didn't learn until much later in life. Unfortunately, no one made a point to teach me growing up. But I find myself being really attracted to that part of my heritage, and so I was always thinking about that and always proud of that. And then at some point in college, I was given the assignment to do a research paper on a world folk music. I went to school at the New School for Jazz in New York City in Manhattan, and my last one of my last classes was a world music class that I took. And I had to write a paper on world music, and I chose Italy because I was thinking to myself that that would be something that would be fun and probably not too challenging because maybe like somehow me being Italian would make it easier. I don't know what I don't know what my thought process was as a young 20 something, but uh, I did it, and what I stumbled upon were these field recordings from Alan Lomax that he did in 1954. And if your listeners aren't sure who Alan Lomax is, he's a famous American ethnomusicologist that is really famous for many recordings, very timely recordings that he made, specifically in America and Appalachia, and also in the South of like blues recordings and folk music recordings. And he just had this knack for being in the right place at the right time. Well, in 1954, he spent 6 months in Italy and he recorded all over the different regions of Italy. And the stuff that he recorded is incredible. And again, he was just kind of in the right place at the right time where a lot of that folk music that he was able to capture is no longer in use or has been just kind of phased out because of things like industrialization or whole towns, leaving Italy, emigration. And when I found those recordings, that was the first time that I ever felt connected to my musical heritage as much as I did like just my Italian heritage. So it was really amazing because as a musician, obviously I love music, and to find music from Italy that I felt that connected to was a really profound moment. And I knew, wow, okay, I got to do something with this music at some point because this is way different and way more diverse than anything I had ever considered Italian folk music to be. I was always thinking it was like the da da da. There's just so much more to it than that. There's so much more to it than that. And I was shocked, like as a first generation Italian American, that I would not have somehow known more about this. And so that kind of process led me down to study a lot of this music over almost 10 years before I started a group. What ended up kind of pushing me towards starting the group was my second degree was in composition at Youngstown State University, and I had a really amazing professor there who encouraged me to like really dig into these roots and dig into this passion that I had for that music and see what happens. And like what happened was this group. And this is the farthest thing from anything I ever thought I would be doing in my career. I did not think that I was going to be a band leader. I've always been a consummate sideman. I never wanted the responsibility of leading a group. But there's something about this that feels so natural and it feels so easy in a way and so joyful. It feels like I'm discovering more about myself with every tune that we write, with every concert that we play. It's been such a beautiful, beautiful experience. And I have to say, like, when I started the group, I thought it was just going to be a passion project. This was just going to be for me. And what's been happening is that people respond to this music in a really genuine way because they connect to what I believe is like the human element of the folk music in a really natural way, in a really meaningful way. And that's been enough to just keep it going, just keep riding this wave. And it's been building for the last 4 years, and it's just been incredible.
That's really super. That's really cool. Yeah, I grew up, we didn't have Italian folk music. We had Volare and,
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
kinds of things. But, uh, uh, um, my Aunt Mary, every time we were in the backyard, they would start with Que La Luna and, some of those more
Yeah.
popular, but those aren't really folk songs either. when we were there and went to a couple of the hometowns, and in fact, my intro is from one of the hometowns in Capocota that I play that they were playing in the restaurant. But one of my favorites is from Calabria, where the song they were singing was Mangiacrappa. And I'm a bad guitar player. I'll tell you about that in a second. Uh,
Okay, all right.
but I said, well, it's only like, I think, two, at most three chords, right? And I said, can you send me the lyrics? And they sent them to me in Calabrian. It was like no language I ever saw in my life.
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
It looked more like Greek than anything else. But
Yeah.
I know what you're saying about the band leader. I was allowed to stay in my band, even though I was kind of one of the founders, because I would book the gigs. So do you play both traditional stuff in Italy, but you also compose your own music then too? Yeah.
So the majority of what we play is still based on those field recordings from Alamo Max. And the way that process works is that I kind of, he's got 11 discs of this material, and then he's got even more of it in the archives at the Library of Congress. So there's an insane amount of material there. And basically, I just listen through these periodically over and over again until I find something that just sparks an idea or sparks some interest. Maybe it's a melody line. And a lot of it is just vocals. There's not typically a harmonic instrument involved. There are some, but a lot of it is vocals. And so I'll go through, find something that either has a theme or a melody that I'm attracted to, and then I flush that out for the 6-piece group. And what's fun about that as an arranger is because there are oftentimes not like really set harmonies, I get to be super creative with how I arrange it. And so that's the other part of what we do is it's not just about bringing recognition back to Italian folk music, but it's also about bringing new life to this stuff because I think it's important to present this music in a way that feels accessible to modern day audiences and makes them feel like it's something that they can take part in.
Yeah, that's really neat. That's really neat. So now, you know, where do you guys play? Do you play like, Italian festivals? I know you did the Prosecco brunch with Phil, but what kind of venues do you play?
Sorry, my kids upstairs.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
We play all over the place. Honestly, we've played venues as small as like a jazz club, and then we've played performing arts centers. So it just depends. It depends on a bunch of things. There's a bunch of, as you've mentioned, there's a bunch of Italian communities across the states. So sometimes it'll be like a cultural center that finds our music and they like what we're doing, like how we're this historical preservation aspect of our group, and they'll bring us in. Other times there's uh, an Italian studies program at a college like Nazareth University in Rochester, and they hear about what we're doing and they're really excited to present that to their students, and they'll bring us in for a concert and workshops. Um, so it's literally all over the map. And right now we're averaging somewhere about 35, 40 gigs a year and traveling. So far, we've traveled as far as Boston, going east, and then Iowa, going west. And then we just recorded our most recent album in LA.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that. That must have been exciting. Yeah. Oh,
Well,
yeah. And you were there during the fires, right?
it was exciting for a multitude of reasons. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll talk a little bit about California when we finish. That's really, really neat. And I want to talk to you also about our festival here in August. And then, one of the things that I wish I had done it sooner. My brother joined an Italian club in Miami, in Florida. He's not in Miami; he's in Vero Beach. But he was talking about it, and I said, "Boy, I'm doing all this Italian stuff. I don't know why I never thought about this, and I never joined the club." So I joined last year, and just about a year ago. And because I do all of this stuff, they made me the head of the cultural committee. And one of the first things I asked them, that we have this big 5-day Italian festival every year, and there's no Italian stuff. So I said, we need to have some Italian music and some dancers and things like that. So I'm certainly on the hunt for that. So we'll have to talk about that.
Oh, that'd be lovely.
But I think that's really, really cool. So Italians that are my generation or come from, how do they react to this? Because the music probably isn't something that they're really used to hearing.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, there are several groups of people, right? There's a few different reactions that we get pretty consistently. You get the people that'll come up to you after a show because again, a lot of this is in regional dialect, so it's not easily accessible from a language standpoint, which is why we make great efforts in the way that we perform the songs and in the way that I arrange the songs to try and tell as much of the story as possible, musically speaking, to invite the audience in being a part of that. And there's a lot of storytelling woven throughout our performances as well. That's another way that we try to.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
But there's the I would say the two or three most common reactions are something like, "Hey, why didn't you guys play Volare?" Or like, "I didn't understand anything that you guys said." And those are probably the most rare reactions that we get, quite honestly. And to which we respond like, "It's not about keeping those alive. Those are doing just fine, staying alive. This project is really about keeping songs alive that otherwise would not be getting any playtime or airtime, right? This is about preserving our culture on a deeper level." And then, but what we get most of the time are people who say, like, "I didn't understand most of what you guys were saying, but I felt so moved by the performance. Like, I never expected that it would be this fun. I never expected that all these different sounds would be a part of Italian folk music." And oftentimes we get people saying that it was kind of like this full arc of emotions. I laughed, I cried, it's pretty amazing. And there's a couple pieces that we do that specifically, I think, touch Italian Americans because they include some of the field recordings from Alan Lomax within the composition itself. And so they feel a connection to that because sometimes they feel like they're hearing family, you know?
Mm,
Sometimes they
yeah.
feel like they hear a grandma or a nonna that they grew up with, and it's like, when you guys played that recording, it really made me think of my nonna or whatever. Yeah, we wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't for those reactions. People from all walks of life, from all different heritages, feel connected to this music in an incredible way, and I really can only tie that to the fact that folk music as a whole speaks to the human experience, regardless of what culture it's from. There's something just integral to folk music across the globe that, like, it's just in us somehow, some way, you know, and it's very
Well,
cool.
let's. Yeah, I know what you mean, and it's kind of uh, from the heart, I guess. Not to
Yeah,
say
very
that
much.
other music isn't, but yeah, I know exactly what you mean, and then that's like I said when we heard some of the music in different places, especially that one in Calabria, and they made us sing it and all of that stuff. It was just that you're immersed in it,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
So, two questions, because
yeah,
if I don't answer at the same time, I'll probably forget. So you said that when you get older, you forget everything. My wife was telling me I forget everything. So first is now, did you have to go out and get all kinds of different traditional instruments? And then the other thing is you kind of mentioned a little bit before that regionally the music is different and maybe even the instruments are different. Yeah.
yeah. That's a great question. So I play a few instruments that are more traditional. I play the tamborello, which is basically just a big Italian tambourine, but there's a specific way to play it that's really unique that I didn't even discover until I started getting into this folk music. And I'm a percussionist, so it was like pretty crazy that there's this whole there's a specific technique and drum that is specific to Italy, and I was like, whoa, this is crazy that I didn't know about this. So that's been really fun. But in general, from listening to the Alan Lomax field recordings, it was more about me trying to find instruments and instrumentalists that I knew that could be flexible enough to kind of create those textures with the instruments that they already have. So there were elements that I knew I wanted to have in the band. Like obviously vocals are important because you can say that it's Italian folk music, but if there's no one singing, then it's a little less convincing, you know? And then I wanted to have brass represented, so we have trumpet and flugelhorn, because in a lot of the northern parts of Italy, there are brass bands. I wanted to have kind of like this string element to it, so guitar and bass, upright bass, are a part of the group because I wanted that folky texture, but I also wanted the ability for like the bass to play arco and have some of that because there's a lot of violin and there's a lot of string instruments that are found in the Lomax field recordings, and of course a ton of guitar. And then accordion is an important texture. He does not play button box, but he does play the keyboard accordion. So again, it's more about textures really, you know, just like what textures are going to give us this sound to where if someone were to just walk into a room where someone's playing this album, they might think to themselves, is this Italian? You know? So I like to try and figure out ways to have this common thread throughout all of the pieces. You know, how do I keep that thread in there? Even when we're doing something that sounds very jazzy or very modern, how do I keep a certain texture woven into it so that it also still feels like this could be Italian folk music?
Yeah, that's cool. And so now how does traditional folk music, because we know how it differs in America, how does it differ in Italy from north to south or region to region or Sicily to the mainland or things
Yeah,
like that?
it varies wildly, because it really, all you have to do is consider where Italy is situated in the Mediterranean, and it really answers all those questions because you think about what are the countries that are up against Italy in the north? What are the countries that are nearest to Calabria and Puglia and Sicilia, and then Sardinia is like this its own thing. It's so crazy. They have this polyphonic vocal tradition in Sardinia that's incredible. It's like involves throat singing. You know, how many people know that that is part of their Italian heritage? That's crazy. You would just not think to yourself, "Oh, of course, yeah, yeah, throat singing. Yeah, I'm Italian. I know about that." Um, and then yeah, it's just there are places where you hear this Greek influence, you hear African influence in Sicily, you hear Spanish, French, German influences, because all of these places have either traded with Italy or have even tried to take over Italy at some point. You know, it's and those little quirks of the different regions have stayed, which is really beautiful. The problem now is that because, and again, speaking to Alan Lomax's incredible timing, 1954, that's also when the television became more widespread throughout Italy. And so you started getting these regions to now for the first time really see on the television, oh, this is how an Italian should dress, this is how an Italian should speak. And it so we started to kind of blur the lines of these regions more as there's more unification in Italy, which is, you know, there's pros and cons, obviously.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I'm trying to learn Italian again. I mean, I could read it and understand it fairly well. Like you, uh, they didn't teach us. But one of the things that's our teacher is telling us too is that, which is sad, I guess, in a way, is that so many English words now are finding their way into the Italian culture.
Yes,
Um,
crazy.
and it's like it's funny. But what is cool there, because it was all Italian. Now there's a resurgence in Italy now to pick up some of the dialect and
Hmm.
speak the dialect again. I always thought I was hearing Italian growing up, but I wasn't. I was hearing mostly Barese from my mother's family. And my dad's family was from Naples, and they used to argue back and forth who was speaking the proper Italian, and as it turned out, neither one of them were.
I mean, you're seeing that in a lot of young people in Italy right now too, which is refreshing. I mean, it's not like it's the popular thing to do necessarily by any means, but there is a whole generation of young people that are kind of carrying on the torch and realizing the importance that if we don't preserve this, it's just going to go away.
Yeah, I've actually when we met somebody over there who was bringing back like an organic farming, and then I also interviewed somebody in Calabria. Uh, they were young; they didn't really know what they wanted to do. One of them worked for the girl who kind of started at work for an airline. She was 23. She left, and they found that they had, I think, 3,000 mulberry trees in her hometown. And they went back to the hometown and they revived the silk industry in Calabria. And besides that, they went to find out how to how to dye the material correctly, and they went to India, and it was all filled with chemicals and everything like that. So they went and found books from like 150 years ago on how to naturally dye the silk, and that's what they do. None of it is with chemicals; it's all natural stuff. Naturally is more expensive, but they want it to be. It's really fascinating that they did this, and they're doing well. They're thriving. So there's more and more of that kind of stuff. Now, is have you found anybody in Italy by chance that's kind of doing something similar to what you're doing with the folk music?
Yeah, there are a few groups actually that kind of have a similar approach as far as taking old folk music and trying to bring new life to it in different ways. To my knowledge, I don't know of any groups that kind of have their foot in the jazz world. A lot of it is like either going the pop direction, or when I say pop, I mean it's still folk music, you know what I mean? But they're going in a direction to where it's like more pop driven harmonies or more rock driven harmonies, and like keeping the dance element to it, which I think is really important as well. Because I think that's kind of like intrinsically tied to folk music in general, is having that ability to dance and sing along. And then there's another route too that's kind of on the more artistic side, that is kind of blending it more with classical music a little bit, or like chamber, kind of more like chamber music in a way.
Right, right, yeah.
When I say that, I'm specifically thinking of a group called Ensemble San Ginetto, and they're based near Milan. We actually did a collaboration with them that was very fun.
Oh, nice, nice. And it's funny that you mentioned a dance because even me, until just not that long ago, we think that the tarantella that's the dance of it. I mean, that's the only dance in Italy. That's the only dance Italians do.
Right.
which which we know is not true, but that's one of the reasons why I do some of this stuff, because me and a few others, we want to dispel the 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 pizza tarantella mafia thing. We're much deeper than that,
Yeah.
and that's what's so great about what you're doing is bringing the culture alive again, and for young people to see and understand that stuff. So now, do playing in a rock band? I can't read music. I mean, a little bit now because I'm trying to learn a piano. But do you actually, when you do all this, do you actually compose all of it and put all the notes and all of that kind of stuff? And as a let me ask the question maybe in a different way. So as a percussionist, how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I play piano as well, but I don't play piano at a level in which I would consider myself performance ready. But I grew up playing piano along with the drums, which at the time I was not very thankful for. In hindsight, I am very thankful for. There are those things in life where your parents make you do it and you're like, "Man, that's such a drag." And then later in life, you see the wisdom. So yeah, I use the piano to do all my composing and arranging. And then, yeah, I input it into a notation program, and everyone has parts. But then when I bring it to the group, it's regardless of how flushed out my parts are, it's very rare that I bring something to the group and that's just
Hmm.
how we end up playing it. There's usually many iterations. Everyone kind of weighs in on what they think about certain compositions or arrangements, or like even when we went to LA and we were rehearsing to record the album, like a week before we left. And one of the songs, we just dropped an entire section. We're just like, this section isn't working. What do you guys think? and they were like, let's just get rid of it and see how it feels. And we did, and it was much better. So it's, it's a constant process of feedback. But yeah, I typically write out all the parts.
Yeah, and yeah, I know exactly what you're saying because we used to do the same thing. If Brian and I came up with a song and we sat, probably easier because there was only four of us, sometimes five, depending, but usually four. And yeah, it's an iterative kind of process, and it always sticks in my head because we had written a few songs already, but I heard Steven Tyler on Howard Stern one day, and Howard Stern said, "Well, how do you, make any of this make sense?" And Steven Tyler said, "It doesn't have to make sense; it just has to rhyme."
I mean, he's not wrong. That's a lot of folk music too, honestly. I mean, sometimes you're like, what in the world? Why is this what you chose? And it does feel like it's just because it rhymes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, well, it's like come together, right? I mean, what do those lyrics mean? Maybe they meant something to John Lennon, but certainly to everybody else is all scratching their heads and trying to figure out what did he actually mean by this.
Yes.
And um, I remember when the Beatles first came out, and I got his poetry book, and like his poetry was just all over the place. But it doesn't have to make sense; just has to rhyme. And I guess that I never thought of it until you mentioned it. I guess that's true with a lot of folk music from this country and probably from other countries
Yeah.
too. That somebody has an idea to come up with something, and that's what they come up with. Well, this has been great. I really enjoy this. So for anybody who wants to get in touch with you, to book you or find you guys and learn more about you, where would they go?
They can go to alaboara.com. So it's just ALLABOARA.com.
All right. Well, fantastic. Thanks again, Anthony. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Bob. It's been a pleasure. Appreciate it.
Cavanticeno io avrò da Moscato, pari cancere la spazialaria. Porukka vantici vorria giattare Aranci, dolci e pomare